direct and hyperpriming. And this is how information usually gets organized in our systems, okay? If something is directly primed, most of the time we would represent this in some type of a hierarchy where the earliest moments in our life create the foundation from which all other information gets organized. So if you have a traumatic event when you're young, information from that event continues to move forward in time with you and begins to organize the way that you are associating with yourself, your environment, other things that might happen in your life, or the choices that you make in order to allow or to avoid what might then happen next. And these pieces of information get linked into what is the present moment. But because all of this is also a part of the thinking process, the present moment doesn't usually get to be experienced for what it is. It's like you can't have this experience without looking at all the other things that came before it to give you a relationship to what you think you're going to experience. In some ways, we might call this looking back in hindsight and using hindsight as a way to understand like what we're going through right now, or when the pattern comes up of, well, I don't want this to happen because I remember what it was like when that happened before. So I'm going to do everything possible to make sure that in this moment, when I'm thinking the same thing, that I don't end up in the same space as I once was when this came up before. Okay, this is quite dense because it means you're never really just free to experience this moment for what it is. And all of this is like a magnetic attachment. It's hard to break away from, again, here being the past. Maybe this is present, or maybe somewhere here is present, and this is like the drive towards the future. If this one's future. So when information is also stored inside of us like this, it's hard for us to get to the root of something, because you have to feel your way back through all the things that it connected with that are making it so strong. But in the present, it might not be so easy to identify all of these parts, or the parts might become the excuse. So for example, someone says, yeah, but this is just the way that I am. Or you don't know what I've gone through in my past. And because I went through those things in my past, this is why I am the way I am. You can't just change that. You can't just change the past or expect me to forget about it or to not have lived a hard life. And I did, so that's why it is the way it is. A lot of this is hardwired at some stage because it's been following the same pathways for so long. And when those pathways get really, really strong, we just can't see anything else anymore. It's like there's no other possibility for it to go a different way, because all of that's blacked out. It just is blank. And all we know is how to follow the same hardwired path as what's been training, or what we've been training unconsciously inside of us for a long time. So this creates density because so when things get hardwired, it's hard. It's very dense at times. Or this is where we begin to feel the magnetism of a situation or a thought pattern, or the way that we're engaging. And when this begins to shift, there are different ways that we can look at it. We might talk about this as neuroplasticity, when the frameworks of the pattern begin to change. If this is your brain and this is the pattern where your brain is used to following the same pathway each time it makes a decision, all of the other possibilities die off. But when we take a look at neuroplasticity and the potential for our brains to rewire, neuroplasticity basically says that our brain has the capacity to take what once was hardwired and begin to see other possibilities again. And as the synaptic connections begin to change or increase, because now instead of just knowing that you have one of two ways of engaging, and you start to see that, wow, there's actually like many different possibilities for the same situation that'll lead to completely different outcomes. Or if I just start to think a little bit more like this instead of this, what would be different? How could things change? Would I have the same magnetic approach to relationships or situations or belief systems in my life? And in the inner dance, we do find that because of the shift in vibration and frequency when we go through the experience, that neuroplasticity is coming alive. And these are the moments when a person might begin to realize that I don't want to do this anymore, or this isn't really me. Yeah, that maybe got seeded in me a long time ago, but I don't need to do it that way. So maybe instead of doing that, I'm actually going to, I'm going to choose all these other things instead. And then the brain has the ability to rewire, so that if it's rewired into these new places, it's going to feel like the same exact situation is completely different. And all of the different ways in which we'll engage with that are altered. A lot of times this is, for the best, because we are expanding the way that we begin to process the information that's coming in. And through new systems, we don't have to filter it in the same types of bottlenecks anymore, where it's really hard to get anything else through. So as things are stretching out, in a sense, in our brain, it's like these bottlenecks start to become more cylindrical. More information is passing through at the same time. So as more information passes through, it is possible to retain more openness, and then for these pathways to begin to recreate a whole internal structure that helps us remember the electrical responses, or how to be the observer, so that it doesn't have to be so direct in one direction every single time something comes up. So this is the early way for me to start beginning to describe hyperpriming. And then if I actually take a look at what is a hyperprimed state, the hyperprimed state is what also leads to this increase of neuroplasticity and the possibility to reshape everything. So if direct priming is more hierarchical, hyperpriming is when you begin to see the patterns and you begin to see how all of the different pieces are connected and interconnected, and how you couldn't possibly have any one thing happening without everything else. And because there's an awareness now that all of these pieces are somehow connected, there's also a potential for this information to rewire. It's not also any longer going in one direction, it's multi-directional. And so each piece is seen as a part of a bigger puzzle that couldn't have possibly come together if not for all of these different pieces. And if these different pieces aren't just representations in our mind for a story or a pattern or a behavior, and it's actual time, this is the first time when time itself stops being so linear. In this as a representation of time, there is no past, present, or future. If this is me right now, I'm just as close to me at 5 years old as I am to me at 150 years old, or in a next lifetime. And I'm also as close to my trauma as I am the thing that I'll experience later on down the road that helps me to understand why that was so important to have happen, rather than to be afraid of it and try to avoid it for the rest of my life or for a really long time. And so we get a chance to experience this non-linear time where all things are possible because they're all interconnected. So in this way, we get to start making new types of connections to different parts of our own information field we would have never thought of relating at some directly primed way of seeing it. And this starts to shift so much because this also requires a lot of heightened vibration in order to take it from that density of a very magnetic, direct way of seeing things into something that's also a lot more free form. When the patterns are emerging, they don't always make sense anymore. You can't put what is happening from before into now into later, but you can see that what happened before could never have happened if it wasn't actually for the future event that you've yet to experience. But the feeling of what that is in relation to now is also helping to bring about some of this retrocausality that happens a lot when we go into nonlinear states. And the more that something is nonlinear, the easier it is for us to reorganize the information and then rewire the way the brain is perceiving anything that is happening, or our relationship to what has already happened. So this is a really beautiful way for the mind to enter these states of electricity and begin to redefine how it's been associating with itself or all the structures of life. Another thing we might say within the direct priming has to do with what we call latent inhibition. In a directly primed system, there's very high latent inhibition, and in a hyper-primed system, it's low, meaning that latent is embedded. It's there under the surface. It's something that we have within us. And inhibition is what limits us, or what we do to limit ourselves. So it might be really common as an association with inhibition to think about drinking alcohol as a way to lower your inhibitions, to let loose, to feel a little bit more comfortable in social environments, things like that. And within the inner dance, we can also say that when the inhibition is low, we are willing to open up to new experiences. This is when you might find your body going into asanas or other mudras that you never knew you had in you, or you've never gone to a yoga class. So how is your body doing this? And when the latent inhibition is low, you enter into a possibility for experiencing this as yourself. And in the inner dance, there's been times, many times when someone who has had physical injury or has had some type of a handicap and physically can't move these parts of their body, come into the inner dance, start moving those body parts, and then afterwards come back through and say, I can't do that. If I try to do that right now, I'm going to hurt myself. How did I just do that in the inner dance? How is that part of me actually moving? This is also a part of when the inhibition is low, when all sorts of other things channel through, light language, maybe something that feels very shamanic or tribal, all of the different ways that we can experience the vibrational shifts in the flow of energy between either the left side and the right side, or the upper body and the lower body, or different energy centers within the body, or even just waves within the flow of the music. And as the inhibited state stays within this lower latency, it continues to allow more room for the possibilities, so that if this is something you can retain after the session, you'll start to notice how you give yourself more permission in your waking life. It might not be in the same way that, like, let's say someone who has a broken back is now doing back bends in the inner dance. They might not decide to go do back bends or try to do that when they're outside of inner dance. But it means that maybe they're willing to just notice for themselves, I did do it. Even if right now I completely 100% believe I cannot do it, I'm still super aware that in that moment, however it happened, I did do it. So what's holding me back right now? Or what makes it feel like this isn't possible right now? And that's what we end up feeling when this inhibition is high. So when we have the high latent inhibition in our system, we work very strictly in the directly primed responses. And they're very magnetic because, again, I broke my back. I cannot do that. So that's not possible for me. And if that's the magnetism that's holding someone's thought pattern in place, that will dictate their life. So if the inner dance gives us the possibility to even explore something different, it can bring about so many really beautiful changes. Questions or thoughts on this?
Can I share just something briefly when you're explaining the hyperpriming? I've been very fortunate with the work I do, get to feel the shifts in my hands when I'm working on people's brains. And having the awarenesses come up. There's one that came up that I've been using for years now, and it's exactly what you said with the hyperpriming and how things are organized. But the way I explain it now is almost like all the books are on the bookshelf, just unorganized. And as the realigning happens, I actually feel when my hands are on someone's brain, the books are realigning themselves on their own, and just it's like innate. It's just happening underneath, and I'm watching it as a witness. And it feels like it's reorganizing. But as you said, all the experiences are already there, the wisdom is already there, the books are already there, and it just starts to unfold, and I just feel it happen, and I stand back. And so it feels like something inside knows and had this bit of opening to reorganize itself. And I see it as like I said, a bookshelf with all the books there, but unorganized, and they just start to move the books on their own, just moving and reorganizing. So it really reminded me of what you're just mentioning.
Yeah,
just wanted to share that.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. I love that. And then just to add like one other scientific layer back to this, what happens in the brain when things are directly primed is very similar to if, let's say, when you're in school and you get trained very, very early on in mathematics, what is 1 + 1?
2. 1, 2.
Is it anything else but 2?
nowadays it can be anything.
Well,
Bad joke, yeah.
now, well, no, but this is also true, right? If when, like, I've done this question with a group of teenagers in India doing inner dance with me, and I asked them, like, can 1 + 1 ever be anything else but 2? No. And here's a group of 13-year-olds, and they're all answering the question this way because this is what you get taught, especially in like traditionally modern school education systems. And thank goodness for Montessori's and Waldorfs and unlearning schools and all of these alternative learning systems where you get a more holistic approach, because finally it feels like we're bringing the truth back into education rather than continuing to brainwash everybody to believe just one thing. So I will then give an example, like, okay, well, I have one candle and I have another candle, and this candle has a flame, and I put the candles together. How many flames do I have? Like, now they're okay. Well, I have 2 candles, but how, and do I have 2 flames? No, then it's 1, right? Or if I have 2 pieces of bread and I put them together, and I stick something in between. Now what do I have? Now I have a sandwich, and that's really different than just 2. So when I share little things like this and get kids to laugh about it and then not take that 1 + 1 has to equal 2 so seriously, it also starts to reprogram the way the brain is thinking, which means they're using different neural pathways than 1 + 1 = 2 in order to think more holistically or to begin to see patterns in what is being spoken or how to solve a problem. And if problem solving doesn't always lead you to just one answer, how do you find new solutions? And if you weren't actually trying to solve problems in the first place, could you use more of your brain to engage with the situation rather than the part of your brain that really likes to solve problems? Yeah. Pattern-based thinking is all, especially in our right hemisphere, while the strict mathematics is a lot more of the left hemisphere. So if your left brain is the part that's used to following a trajectory of thought to go in a direction, or like that engages in the direct priming, for example, and you introduce something that's very right-brained, now you're starting to have synaptic connections and all parts of the right hemisphere flashing if you were to stick an MRI reader onto your head and take a look at it. And if these new parts are actually getting to engage in what used to just be one way of thinking and one part of your brain engaging with that information, I do feel like you'd feel it, right? Like what you're saying, like you can feel it, how it's getting reorganized or it's starting to light up, right? And I can feel it when I'm working on someone's head too, that like, whoa, there's a part here and that doesn't normally connect to here, let's say, right? So if this is now engaged at the same time that this is engaged, what is that doing? And that also starts to build more of that neuroplasticity because the brain becomes aware that it can talk to different parts at the same time and actually have a really great conversation, not one that just sounds like jibber jabber or blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I think that's, yeah, and like a really nice analogy for like, where are your books? And then how do you get them to like be sharing the same kind of story about one thing?
Yeah, that I won't get into too much, but that opens up a whole new door of different body parts being able to speak to other body parts, and then realizing that they didn't even have anybody else to talk to. A lot of people and their organs and stuff feel very alone. The light is turned off and don't even know they have a next door neighbor inside of them. So when these connections start to form, it's like the street lights turn on. This is the way I see it anyways when I go through my experience. So I've come up with my own understanding, but it feels like the street lights start to turn on little by little inside people's body, and then everybody can start to see, like when I mean everybody, like different organs, different parts of our body start to see a light shine in a distance, and you can almost tell their awareness is starting to, what is over there? What is over there? And so just placing your hand on these different parts supports that process. And it's almost like they're almost on the way to do it themselves. And just by being intrigued by what is that light, or why is that organ looking a little bit different and not darkness anymore?
Yeah.
It's a whole other world of connecting with the body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel like this is also what comes up in inner dance a lot. And this is a part of how the hyper priming is very much connected to the electricity. And if electricity is also like the lightning, is also the light, and the light goes on, and then that means that something is connected and that it's awake and it's aware of itself in some way. This is very much an electricity response. So it starts to engage with the nervous system differently. And if the nervous system was used to engaging in a sympathetic response, but now it's experiencing the same information from a parasympathetic response, that organ maybe gets to finally rest. It doesn't have to go into overdrive, and it can let something else take over. This is how we might find that direct priming in relation to the magnetism and the density of the physical body could be holding a tumor in place. But once you start to increase the electricity responses and it gets to see itself from all these other points, that blockage gets to disperse. It gets to become less strong. And again, it's like that shift in the vibration is allowing for things to move. And the more that it moves and the more that multiple parts of the body are engaged in this conversation at the same time, the more it can also dissolve. So I've done a lot of work with this with people in transformation medicine and have seen what happens to a tumor when you start to speak with someone this way. And I'm going to show one more diagram really quick, and I won't go through it in a ton of detail today, but there's definitely a video about it as well. And this is the avoidance cycles. And just as like a prelude to that, when I've done this with people in transformation medicine, and let's say that like here, the directly primed response is pain, and instantly it's just ouch. And nope, that hurts. I'm not going to use that. Nope, that's too painful. How do you shift to a hyper-primed way of perceiving pain? So if pain is the directly primed response and the inhibition is very high, nope, don't move it, don't touch it, don't go near me. I have to baby this for the next 5 years. Maybe by then it's just going to be a disability, but who cares, because this is too painful to do anything with. I'll usually begin by engaging what is pain as a dialogue, to shift it into, can you perceive your pain as pressure? And if you can get the pain to be more pressure rather than painful, the next step would be like, how can you change this from pressure to vibration? And a lot of the time when you can get the pressure to turn into vibration, it stops being pain anymore. There's no connection to it as painful. It's a vibration, and you can move that. The vibration can move through your whole body, so it doesn't get isolated anymore. And this is a way that I've helped people in their own self-healing processes, from like spraining an ankle and having swelling, and then instantly just like shifting things over in the perception, which starts to hyper prime the relationship to what just happened. It's not perceived anymore as injury, especially if injury is involved. If you already broke the bone or you already sprained it, that was the injury. Now everything else is a healing process. So if you can see that, like, after that incident, everything is healing from now on, you're no longer seeing yourself as injured. And if you don't have the perception of being injured, it's a lot easier to dissolve the pain. So these are different ways of like focusing on the electricity as a part of the natural flow to move energy in the body.
Would you say changing that original pain to colors and shapes be the same?
Yeah. Finding a way to also visualize as a way to support that change is amazing. I think that can also be helpful. In the inner dance, that'll come up naturally a lot of the time. If somebody goes into the process with the intention of understanding what they're feeling, a lot of different types of imagery will come up, and incredibly connective imagery. Like, I remember the first inner dance that a woman did with us who came to stay at the eco village because she had bone cancer, and she just went into the jellyfish, and there was all this information about the jellyfish coming up, and I decided I need to research this. Like, she's tapping into something very old, and I can't understand it just yet, but I think I'll be able to find it if I look for it. And I started to find certain chromosomes in the jellyfish that are very connected to the bone marrow of the human, and that this is the same kind of a consistency in that creature that we have inside our bodies. And the way that connects to the flow of information was really phenomenal. I wish I could remember all the details, but it was super specific and a long time ago now. But that's incredible. And so she was really starting to understand from some of these origin points, like, what is this bone cancer, and how did it get locked, or in what way, by finding the symbolic connections, can we start to deconstruct what was perceived as real but was actually imaginary, so that it can transform into what is actually real. And that's a part of this as well. So in a typical cycle, what happens is we have this relationship with pain, and this is somewhere embedded in us. This is there whether we're having a pain experience or not. But when we have a pain experience, what often happens next is either we instantly become afraid of the experience, or there's something inside our brain that we would consider the catastrophizing agent that begins to say all sorts of things that are going to make us even more afraid. Oh, I'm gonna bleed to death if I don't get this fixed, or this is so painful, I'm gonna die. Oh no, like I have a cough. I must go to the doctor right now. I probably have COVID. I'm gonna. This narrative in relation to the catastrophizing agent in the last few years has been massive, and even doctors, at the beginning of the pandemic, oh, okay, we should lock you away for 2 weeks. You can't see your children. You can't even have someone come to visit. All of this came from how strong the catastrophizing agent was, and how deep into the density of magnetism this brings us. So when that agent kicks on, it tends to intensify the fear. And when the fear gets really, really strong, we don't want to do anything else other than what we think is going to make us feel safe or comfortable or at ease. So if that means once the fear kicks on, oh, this is it, I'm going to need surgery, or I'm going, however it goes, all these different things that we might be spiraling into. Even that first step, which might be like, take a pill, make it feel better. Yeah, part of it's going to feel better, but the other part of it isn't going to be able to use it anymore because it's numbing it out, and it's not able to connect with the pain as a part of the experience. It's avoiding the pain within the experience so that it can try to get better. But if you don't understand the pain, it's really hard to get to a place where this doesn't become a negative feedback loop that just keeps spiraling and spiraling. Every time you get a cough, you're going to run straight to the doctor, or every time you get a headache and you go straight for a pill, you feel better in the moment, but the recurrence and the need for taking something is going to be there more and more. So these turn into the negative feedback loops that also lock a lot of the directly primed responses in place that lead to this depth of magnetism that says, no, I can't do that. This isn't going to be good for me. And in reality, this isn't to do just with pain. This is also fear avoidance. This is information avoidance. And it's also pain. So we can think about this in a physical way, we can think about it in the emotional way, and we can think of it cognitively. So if any of these three big systems are experiencing avoidance as a cycle, this is usually what it goes through. And for fear, perhaps like there's a fear experience that has to do with, let's say, a broken heart. And so now the mind says, yeah, if you decide to go out and date again, you're just gonna get hurt, or oh, like you don't know what you're doing, and you know this is this is just gonna get you in trouble, or oh, you got to watch out for those types of men or women. And so now there's a fear of not only getting your heart broken, but not being able to figure it out. So then you just sit at home and like play video games or watch romantic comedies or eat a bowl of ice cream or something every night instead of going out dating. And how are you going to really be able to feel connected to what is possible if you don't give yourself possibilities? So any of these kind of avoidance cycles can happen in many different ways. And I'm sure we all have plenty of examples in our own life when this has been a recurrent theme or something we're working through. So to get beyond these feedback loops, we would need to come into some type of a confrontation. And this doesn't mean that you're fighting it. It means that you're willing to come face to face with it. Like if you came face to face with your own pain or face to face with your own fear, what would it look like? What would it feel like? And then we have two different ways of working with this. One would be internal processing and the other external. And in the end, this is able to bring us into a state of recovery or reintegration. And there's one thing that also happens in the inner dance, and this is when that part of the hyperpriming turns online. It's like we get to go from the pain itself, or from the pain experience, kind of straight past the confrontation and into the processing, because there's already a layer of trust. So when we find ourselves in a very deep state of trust, there's a lot less inhibition. And when there's more trust than inhibition, we do enter into a hyperprime state. We don't have to come face to face with the thing that we're afraid of in quite the same way. We're bypassing it in a sense, but it's not being bypassed in an avoidance where you're bypassing the work. It's bypassing the directly primed responses, because the trust is so strong that the electricity is very high, and it gives us this capacity to move straight into various types of internal and external processing that will lead to the recovery, without having to sit with that cup of tea with the thing that you're afraid of. Sometimes the inner dance will go through this same type of cycling where you do have to confront it. You do have to sit face to face with your fear or with your pain, and you have to have a conversation with it, or you have to come back into self-love in order for it to evolve into something else. And then there's this trust part, which is very spontaneous, or maybe even miraculous. And it's all about that high electricity that allows for the hyperpriming to actually initiate the recovery, because of just how powerful this can be when it does happen. Again, this isn't something we can expect, nor is it something that we can transmit, or that we can specifically activate. We have to also trust in what spontaneously arises when we allow ourselves to enter deeply into a state of trust. So trust the trust, and then the spontaneousness comes about. And then this is why often within our dance we say, as like a slogan or a tagline, trust the process. And a lot of really amazing things can come through.
That happens on their own terms, right? It's got nothing really to do with us.
No. I can speak with people about these cycles and ways that this is happening in them, or I can look at like a map with them of themselves. Maybe it's as tangible as a biofeedback reading, where I get to see where the energy is moving, what amount of energy is mental, spiritual, or physical. I can see the way the imaging shows up with the colors of the chakras and then speak to the person that way. Maybe this is me just listening to them about their pain experience or about their injury or what happened to them, so that I can also help them reorient some of their information to allow for a hyperprimed response to come through. But I can't initiate that hyperprimed response. They have to do that themselves. But when we create the conditions in which change can happen, a lot of times change will happen. But when we work with the inner dance, we're in the position to create the conditions. We can't force the change. But if we know how to create the conditions, a lot of the times the change will just happen. Reese, was this helpful for understanding a bit more of the human psychologies in relation to magnetism?
Yeah, and then my signal decided to cut me out, so I kind of lost the last part. But yeah, I kind of understand. I was doing like a part of. I used to do Joe Dispenza's stuff anyway. So there was that's why I was kind of going back and forth between almost the ego, because he almost goes into that part of the unconscious and the conscious mind being that way of being. So that's kind of where I was like trying to see if it was a different way you were explaining it. And then I've learned a little bit about neuroplasticity as well, so I understood like the synapse and stuff and how they grow and they can reattach. So yeah, that kind of started tying in together.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do either of you have any other questions or thoughts or feedback?
I'm following. I understand it. I'm like I said before, I'm quite fortunate with all the craniosacral work and studies I've done over the years. So I find it fascinating how what you're sharing is equal or on par with what I have been studying over the years. So it they blend nicely together. So I'm able to follow you with my training in the past. It's not foreign to me. This is my world.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's great. This is also why I brought it in, because normally I wouldn't go into something like so deep into the psychologies of the mind and the human body right after talking about the electricity and magnetism as a foundation. But I figured you both had context, so I was like, okay, I think I can just go into this quickly, but in relation to what we were talking about.